All right, this is awesome. Thank you, JD, for being here on the Badass Asian Dudes podcast. It's really good to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, today we have you coming on to talk about uh, a lot of what the work you're doing with Crushing the Myth and telling Asian American stories, as well as what your journey was into starting this into entrepreneurship. But first, a quick little intro with me today. I also have Michael Wu. You want to say hi?
Hey, I'm Michael Wu. I'm one of the co-hosts and moderators for the Badass Asian Dudes group and podcast. I'm based out of Tokyo, Japan, and just super excited to be here today and to chat with you and get to know you a bit better, JD.
For sure.
Awesome. And I'm Victor Ung. I am an emotional intelligence coach and cannabis wellness coach, and work with Asian men specifically on how to develop emotional intelligence, find more life purpose in their work, and deepen their relationships. So I joined the Badass Asian Dudes through Sabo Shen, who got connected through Chris Kim, and the original founder of Badass Asian Dudes kind of took a leave. It sounds like he's working on many other projects right now. So Mike and I are one of the couple people that came on to help support the group, and really love building the group into a more connected space for men, especially Asian men, to talk about the issues, the bigger issues that we don't really talk about at all. These for many reasons, right? For culture, for the stigma, for the ideas of what it means to be both Asian and man. But so anyway, we're here definitely to bring on super badass Asian dudes, and so excited to have you here. So JD, do you want to maybe do a quick intro then of yourself and why you got into the work you're doing right now, as well as what kind of where do you see yourself playing a role in that work as well?
Yeah, I'm JD, and I'm currently in Taipei, Taiwan, but I grew up in the U.S., born in Taiwan, grew up in the U.S., kind of lived all over, Texas, Southern California, SF, New York, DC. Austin is probably where I would call my home, but I mean, with everybody these days, I think everything is in pretty fluid times. My background is in it's quite varied. My 20s, I was a movie producer out of LA, also worked a little bit in Taiwan. Then in my 30s, I launched 3 technology companies, did them out of SF and DC and Austin. And the last few years, I have been working on a project called Crushing the Myth, which is an Asian American speaker series. And I launched that about a year and a half ago, January 2019, out of New York. And in 2019, we did speaker events in New York and LA. We had 12 of them live, and then we would record the speakers and distribute the videos online. And then this year, also a little bit because of COVID, we've gone more virtual. So the mission of Crushing the Myth is to bring Asian American perspectives to a global audience. And we've been able to do that virtually as well. So really excited to talk about any of that stuff that I just said.
I love it. One thing that I get fascinated about is just people who are able to build out a platform to tell these stories. What was that transition for you to? It sounds like you were going into tech and sort of developing that side of things. What made you want to do more of I don't know what you would say, it sounds like more of a kind of social impact in a way, right? Relative to the companies that you started before?
Yeah, it was in parallel. So what I mean by that is, Crushing the Myth is not my day job. It's actually my money pit, but we'll talk about that later. But it was in parallel. So in my mid 30s, I had been working on a lot of companies. Started an AI startup, but yeah, like in my 30s, I got a little bit more into groups like TAP, Taiwanese American Professionals, and then from TAP, I found myself in Austin with my latest startup, or at that time, and the Austin Asian American Film Festival was going through a transition from a grassroots volunteer-based festival, and meaning that they couldn't receive corporate donations, and trying to get into a 501c3 or becoming a 501c3. And the community leaders, or the leaders of the Austin Asian American Film Festival, they were seeking a board. They were seeking people that had corporate experience, that also had some film background, to transition this film festival that we all love into a 501c3, or else it would probably have died in that year. So they came to me and said, hey, you do startups, you have a business background, and you have the film background. Would you mind, or would you be interested in leading the board? And I thought about it, and I said, sure, I've never done anything like this before. Why not? So I found myself the board president, or the board chair of the inaugural 501c3 board, meaning that I learned all about the nonprofit activism space, and what not just the business side of things, but started meeting people and started really understanding the themes around it. And having been a part of the Austin Asian American Film Festival for a couple of years, yeah, that kind of did open my eyes to what is Asian American identity. And then I had to ask myself, mid 30s, are I never really thought of myself as Asian or Asian American. I was kind of living a regular life. But then I quickly went, wait a second, your life is every Asian, or how is your life different from other Asian American? And at some point it clicked. There's an aha moment that people talk about. And that aha moment goes whoa, I am Asian American. And then, whoa, no one talks about this experience of being Asian American, whether as a guy or a girl, or whatever. So that had been percolating in my mind for about a year, maybe 2 years. And then I found myself with the right time in transition in the beginning of 2019. I found myself in New York, where I just said, screw it, I'm just going to do something. So I started Crushing the Myth. And at first, there was a long-term plan. There is still a long-term plan, and it goes way beyond a speaker series. But at first I thought, okay, I'm going to put up a Facebook invite, and I'm going to try and do a Asian American TED Talk, and let's see what happens. And that's how it got started.
That's a really cool way to put it, is just Asian American TED Talks. So it sounds like it was just a mix. You just kind of found yourself in this place where, using your background, your skills from before, and kind of this opportunity in a way presented itself, and you figured this would be a great thing to take advantage of.
Yeah. It was started as a passion thing, even though I'll take a step back. When I launched Crushing the Myth, the goal is still to have an annual Asian American culture conference, or like an Asian American South by Southwest, if you will, somewhere in the country once a year, where people of all communities, not just Asian American, can come together and talk about music, film, technology, of course, but other things: politics, engineering, science, literature, arts. All of these things should be coming together. And in my mind, I thought that there wasn't anything like this for the Asian American community, the current day Asian American community. And I wanted to launch that, which I we're still planning for. And just with the entrepreneurship background, if you peel that back, right, like to do an event like that, 3 days somewhere in the US, we actually created a project plan and a budget that landed somewhere around $500,000. If you peeled it back to get the corporate sponsorships to be able to pull something like that off, you have to show demand and interest. So going all the way back to showing demand and interest, my thought was, well, let's see how much interest there is for speakers to share their perspectives on mainstream culture through an Asian American lens. And that was the launching of Crushing the Myth. And we're still working towards the idea of a full, weekend of Asian American culture at some point in the next few years.
I would love that, and would love to attend it. I just wish that there was something for me back in the day to attend something like that. So, I guess I'm curious, like, why do you think it's important to have a specific stage for Asian Americans right now?
Why do I think it's important for that stage and platform? I think it's important for any community. I think it's important for all communities, especially given the current scenario or the situation. I think for Asian Americans, right? Like I think for Asian Americans, there's so much segmentation even within the Asian American community that we don't know where we belong or fit. And some would actually say, like, we don't need to think about that because we live a American life. We live a life as a regular American, and we all do. But others are looking for more meaning and more structure to their identity. And it is important to have this platform for people to share those stories. Then I think that it is important to have this platform because I think the Asian American perspective, so what I mean by that is not my past, but my future. So my past is I grew up as the children of immigrants, and we ate one bowl of rice every night, and et cetera, et cetera. That may be my past. My future is how I'm going to change the world, right? So, for example, I'm going to launch an Asian American Culture Con. That perspective is valuable, and it's not being brought out into the mainstream. And I actually think that it could be economically very viable. So the best way that I can encapsulate this is look at like David Chang. So he's very successful, obviously, huge food empire. But David Chang cooks and creates and fuses into his food an Asian American perspective. It's a perspective that likely a white American, African American, Latinx American could not have done in the 2000s and the 2010s when David Chang was building his empire. It brought everything from how he grew up and his mother teaching him cooking to him being a line cook in New York, etc. Right? So that's a great story to share on a cultural basis. But if I knew David Chang was going to become David Chang now, I would have gone back in 2002 and put all my money into David Chang, right? There's an economic opportunity in Asian Americans that is not equated in the marketplace today. And that's what I am super passionate about.
I love that you said that. I mean, there's definitely a lot of potential for sure. Um, and again, just want to applaud that you are going after that and really set it, like carving that path first for a lot who maybe don't think it's possible, or maybe have been contained in some way, whether that be cultural or familial or just society. So that kind of leads me into just I'd love to kind of tap into the mindset of how you've especially you said you started three startups and, went through so many different transitions. Um, what was what was that like in terms of, first of all, starting off and doing one thing and then transitioning into different things, but also really like starting your own thing versus kind of following a, a linear path that I think many Asian Americans might kind of fall trapped to.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I was thinking about it. So I just turned 40 uh, last couple weeks ago, and I was thinking about it. And I've launched 3, 4 tech companies, and they have all not exited the way that we wanted them to. Uh, I've produced a couple of movies. I mean, I've had a couple of successful outcomes, but I'm definitely not one of those guys that has sold a big company or, multi-exit or anything like that. And I find myself gravitating more and more towards bigger and bigger ideas. Like Crushing the Myth is a pretty big idea. I would actually label Crushing the Myth in the thought leadership space. I'm currently working on something in Taiwan that's also in the thought leadership space. So I think that if the stereotype is that Asian people, and then so byproduct Asian Americans, are conservative in mindset and they take the doctor, accountant, lawyer, engineering route, which my parents, my dad absolutely wanted me to do. If that's the stereotype, then yeah, I don't think I fit into that stereotype. But the question for me uh, is that an Asian American stereotype or is that an Asian stereotype? That's the thing that I started thinking about more. For example, so Asian Americans, guys or gals, let's say that you don't find a lot of us in the sales world. We are a lot of engineers, we're a lot of doctors, accountants, but you don't find a lot of, I don't know, VP sales that are Asian American or all the way up, right? They definitely are out there, of course, but predominantly that's not what you think of. But if you look at Asia, they're fantastic Asian salespeople because they all build companies, right? And if you look at Asia, they're fantastic entrepreneurs or they're fantastic anythings, right? So then I started thinking about when I was growing up, oh yeah, you should be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. I honestly started asking myself like, man, is that actually an Asian mindset or an Asian American mindset? Being in Taiwan now, I have a lot of cousins that are my age or younger. I got to tell you, like, they didn't grow up having to be a doctor. Not a lot of them. Like, and a lot of them aren't doctors today. And my aunts and uncles are kind of just okay with that. So when you ask me, what is it like to start and stop things, and me maybe being different from the Asian American stereotype, then yeah, I think at some point you just have to know yourself. And if you say, I love being a doctor, I want to be a doctor, or I want to pursue law because family reasons or because that's what I'm good at or anything, that's great. Then that is your identity. And then, but if you're somebody that's like, man, I want to be in comedy, then dude, then just, make it work somehow. Because because you shouldn't be a doctor because you're an Asian American. You should be a doctor because you want to be a doctor.
Yeah, that sounds. I think it might be a function of how the attitudes of the people who came over to America and how their idea of what it was like to succeed here. So there might be some kind of selection bias as well, a function of the people coming here. And just
Yep.
hearing your story, I feel like I am you, but like 8 years before. And congratulations on turning 40, by the way.
Thanks.
You do not look it at all.
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I totally agree, right? Like if you were gonna, well, now we also do need to segment it correctly. If you're an immigrant child from a East Asian American family, you probably came over and your parents went into education of in some way, being a student or a teacher. But there are other Asian American communities in which that immigrant population were refugees coming over, or they came over in different circumstances. So if you're, if you're Vietnamese, right, Laotian, like they came from war essentially, and they were refugees coming over. So at that level, I would say like Asian America starts then segmenting into different identities, etc. Yeah, so I do think that it is a interesting point. I don't know if I would agree with this, but I think that Asian American is going to become a identity on the global scale itself. So our thoughts as Asian Americans are different than our peers in Asia, even if we're the same age, right? Asian American is going to have a level of identity probably over the next few decades.
For sure. For sure. I think we've already definitely have that separation in identity where, as an Asian American myself, growing up in college, there was a lot of my college had a lot of Asians, both international and domestic, and it was kind of hard to fit in. It's like don't necessarily fit in with the international Asians, but also not fully American. So I always say it's like we make our own color. There's yellow and blue that turns into green, right? So then we're just our own in that sense, and it sounds like that's a lot of that mission in crushing the myth is really pulling that out of Asian American stories, right? Really creating our own identity,
Yep.
just in just expressing that, which is pretty badass, right? So and to that point, right? This podcast is definitely about how we can just become more badass, and that's kind of where I was hinting at with the question is, you know, um, for many who, so actually maybe I'll just start by asking, what do you think badass or being a badass Asian dude might mean to you? Just your own perception of that.
That's a great question. Oh, that is an awesome question. I think that my first reaction would be a badass Asian dude should be happy and content. I guess either or you can combine that. And I guess that's for everyone, but that would be my first thought. So, for example, right, in the Asian American male space, let's say, if I knew, and I do, like if I have a friend who's Asian American male, and they seem very happy with their life. Maybe they're married, maybe they're single, maybe they're dating, maybe they have a job, maybe they don't. They seem happy with their life. I would say that's a pretty badass guy, because I do think that Asian American males do go through uh, a lot of self-realization or figuring shit out. And if they can come out and be happy and content, then uh, I think that's a pretty badass guy. And then my mind goes like, well, how are you so happy? Like tell me your story. But that would be my first answer. Then I think there are like layers and layers of why that person is content or happy, right?
No, I think that totally makes sense, and that's a lot about what we're trying to bring the new direction of bad towards that fulfillment and emotional intelligence as a whole package, along with accomplishment. So how do you think you can balance that like inner happiness with like these external signals to go do these awesome things and go achieve and yeah.
To be honest, I don't know. Like, I watch world events quite a bit, and I'm fairly self-reflective, or I hope to be. And I don't know. I mean, like, there are some playbooks, I'm sure. Like, there are some playbooks for, I mean, this podcast or this recording today in our group is Asian American males. So I guess we would just stick there, right? So there's some playbooks for Asian American males to, quote unquote, become happy. A lot of them are cosmetic based. So a type of career, a type of savings, a house, a car, a family. A lot of that stuff is cosmetic based. There is a lot of value in that. That if you have a lot of the cosmetic stuff, there'll be less pressure on you overall in whatever you're doing. But I mean, I'll speak from my own perspective. Like, Asian American males face the challenge of being invisible. I would say something like Asian American females may face the challenge of having like too much focus on them. And then other, racial communities have varying challenges themselves. But for the most part, I believe that Asian American males have the task or the perception of being invisible. For people that are okay with that, maybe easier for you to be happy and content, right? If you've got a fairly low, below the radar kind of lifestyle, maybe very happy, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. But for I would say even like somebody like myself who is fairly outgoing, wants to be an entrepreneur, or launches and starts things, the challenge is going to be getting out of the invisibility and then making an impact. Yeah.
I mean, I love that sort of vision too, or that sort of visual, right, of being invisible. I completely resonate with that. And it sounds like, again, bringing this back and connecting the dots here, that is a part of your mission with crushing the myth, is
Right.
again pulling that out and making us less invisible. Because I think a lot of, if we think about what is happiness, what is contentment, that's a big question that's going to be different and subjective for everybody. But I would say a big part of that is feeling like you can, first of all, express yourself, but also connect with others and relate to others. I'd say, like, growing up for myself, not seeing any other role models or representation, or even just my uncles or dad, father figures, um, with a very limited sense of what I was supposed to be, right? And not seeing all these different stories, or not seeing other types of role models, it can be really sort of debilitating and constrictive. And I just mentioned that because I think, I could be, or I was one of those people who fell into that. I don't want to say trap, but it is fell into a path of, like, this is what you should do, or this is what you have to do to be a good son, to be a good father, or whatever. And it limits the risk taking. It limits the um, just badassery, right? Of doing things and putting ourselves out there, and whatnot. So it's super cool to hear that. It sounds like, you know, I guess I am curious then, from what your childhood was like, and we don't have to go super in detail there, but in terms of, like, what maybe forms of resistance did you get, starting your own thing, if any at all, or what kind of emotional obstacles were in your way in building this life that you have?
Yeah, I mean the usual stuff. I'll go back. There's a little bit more that I would say on Asian American male, and let's say that because we talked about being invisible, so let's say that the goal is to be visible, right? And by visible, I mean mainstream culture knows who you are. So let's go back to our favorite icon, Bruce Lee, right? So I talk about this idea with a lot of people, and it spreads in the film industry and the music industry, and now let's say we're specifically talking about Asian Americans and then Asian American males. It's this concept of the supply, and then what I would call like the pipeline and the LeBron. Okay, if you're playing basketball, you need a lot of like young basketball players, kids, to play basketball. They got to play basketball when they're in middle school, high school, college. They got to play on the playground. There just needs to be a lot of basketball players. Now, out of all those basketball players, there's only one LeBron. And that LeBron is so much better than everybody else that when you identify that LeBron, there's this whole other world. So the pipeline. Schools have basketball equipment, gymnasiums. The YMCA has a basketball court. Community centers provide basketball courts for kids to play basketball in. That's building the pipeline. When a 7-foot, kid can do everything LeBron can when he's 10 years old, then there's this whole other sector that goes and nourishes LeBron. From an agent to a coach to a fitness trainer to parents to emotion to all that stuff. So Asian American males, where are we today? If the goal, this is not the goal for everybody, but if the goal is to be visible, whether it be Henry Golding, David Chang, Andrew Yang, whoever, the goal is, if the goal is to be visible, then how are you approaching that? How are you supporting it? Are you in the business of creating more basketball hoops for Asian American males? Or are you in the business of the sports agent that goes and signs LeBron? I would argue that it's easier and it's more needed right now for people to go and build basketball goal hoops for Asian American males. I don't care if they're good, bad, left, right, up, down, or anything else. If you are Asian American male, and again, this is broad-based. I would say the same thing for Asian American female, but this is a badass Asian male group. But you should be encouraging Asian American males to start podcasts, to write books, to shoot short films, whatever. You're in the business of expanding Asian American males that are doing shit from X today to 10X. And I think that's where a lot of us are right now. And I think that we should be very happy and very proud of that. We want more Asian American males, again, anybody, but Asian American males to be doing stuff, to be playing the game. Then this is where Goldhouse comes in, right? So then there are organizations, people, agencies, supporters who need to go and find the LeBron or find the Bruce out of that group and then support them with everything that they've got so that they can get to the very top. And I think that this is something that when I bring up in conversations, people generally are like, oh, I haven't thought about it that way. So for example, right, some like Wong Fu brothers, some of the, great leaders and support organizations in the Asian American space, they're fantastic. Like they paved the way, right? But at the same time, we got to find the next Bruce Lee. Like if that's the goal, then you got to Beyonce this stuff. You can't just end at Wong Fu. Wong Fu is great, but you got to sell out Madison Square Garden, right? You got to go all the way up. Ali Wong is probably a really good example. Like, you got to be top 3 in your career or in your industry. And that will only come if there's a huge pipeline of people, Asian Americans, playing basketball.
Right.
I love the
Yeah,
cultural
no.
references.
What's
Yeah,
that?
those are great.
So like what, so I think about that for Crushing the Myth, by the way. Like that, I think about that. So you talk about, you asked me the question, what's it like to start new things and to, keep going to the next thing? In my mind, I'm going, what's that like? Well, I'm probably just trying to play some basketball right now. Like I'm not doing everything under the sun. I'm trying to do it as best as I can, but I'm part of the pipeline. I'm part of the high school team trying to be JV or varsity. And around me, I need more, like we need more of this stuff, right? We need more of this stuff. And then let's say that one group, badass Asian group or slanted or Asian AF, somebody gets into mainstream, Vanity Fair is covering them, GQ is covering them. They're selling out, Ronnie Chen is starting to sell out across the nation. Then we should support them because they're going to lift everybody that's playing basketball. And because they're going to bring way more resources, and then they have another challenge, which is they got to go and get to the very, very top, right? And they have to set that trend.
Well, I mean, there's so much to go in there, but what I love about that is and what I take is that this is the time for us all to be just supporting each other, right? This is us to really lift each other up, as coming from the Eastern philosophies of collective thought, right? This is our chance to really live to those values.
Yep.
And really support each other. And I think, to that analogy too of playing basketball, what I love is not only are we supporting each other to get into the game, but also encouraging people to, Asian men specifically, again with this podcast, to actually play basketball, like you said. Because what that makes me think of is there are so many people out there who might not think they are good enough or have the skills, and this is outside of the basketball analogy, right?
Yeah.
Whatever you are
Start a
in your
company, open a
exactly
restaurant.
exactly. So like asking for promotions at work, like just being more assertive
Yep.
with, challenging other things and asking for what you want. I think that's a good definition of badassery too, is just really getting what you want. And so part of, and I love that you mentioned that, because this is a big platform here that we'd like to also support in, is um, providing whatever resources, whatever tools, whatever mindset, or whatever better ways of thought, better questions to ask that helps us understand we can go play basketball if we really want to. And I think that is a better way to help everyone else as well. I love that analogy. Yeah, I was just kind of riffing off that.
Yeah, it's something I think about quite a bit, in terms of like strategy, even to the platform or whatever. What is Crushing the Myths? What are we in the business of? Are we in the business of finding the next LeBron or Beyonce or Bruce Lee? Or are we in the business of creating a platform so that more people can play basketball? And
Right.
like for me, that I think about that, right, quite a bit.
And what I love is that now when we hear about this, it's like, oh, I can go and like use that stage and use that platform.
Absolutely.
And in a way, like you don't have to do everything yourself. Something again that I might fall trap to is like, oh, I gotta do everything myself and be
Right.
independent in
Right.
Oh, Victor, I can't hear you. Oh.
Is not working.
Oh, here we go. You're back. You're back.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, I want to be mindful of our time here and really appreciate you coming on and sharing this passion of yours. I know that there were so many different things that we could have dove into here, but again, just really love to hear that there are people who are here to support is what I take out of this, right?
For sure.
We don't buy, like it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to receive help, and there are people who want to help. So um, yeah, thank you again for coming on. Is there, I don't know if there's any
Oh
last
yeah.
thoughts that you'd like to say or ask.
Can I ask something? Yes, I guess. Yeah, and in that way, I think it's really good that we connected today. I had like one last question. You said you were part of TAP and possibly, I don't know, in college I was part of TASA and later TAP. I think that realization that I was Asian American came probably around college time, and I'm just a little surprised that you said that happened a lot later for you, even though you were in these like Asian organizations. um,
Yeah, I wasn't part of TAP until like 35, something like that. And so when I grew up in suburbs of Dallas Fort Worth, and my family growing up wasn't very like we weren't very outspoken, pretty low key. And I wasn't like the typical Asian American in high school. We had a 5A high school, and I kind of looked down upon the Asians that my mom would always say, "Oh, they're scoring really high on tests. Why can't you score the same?" Like some guy was like number one or number two. I was like number 10, right? And that's a comparison. But I ended up taking my own route. I ended up being class president of the school, and then that led me to into my 20s. So, anyways, my point is that in my 20s, I worked in LA as a film producer. I went to Wake Forest, which is a really white school. I didn't really understand being Asian American, yeah, until like mid 30s when I got into TAP and the Austin Asian American Film Festival. And I had always thought those groups, because I was not a part of any of that in college or post college. I just thought, man, those groups are like the Asian American frat or whatever that I don't understand. And then in my mid 30s, I was like, oh, wait a second, I'm actually part of those people, right? Or I'm actually like I actually grew up in a lot of the same scenarios. So that was when my identity aha kind of clicked in.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. That it makes me think about all these other things now too. But um, I did want to maybe ask or give you the space here. If there was someone listening to this who uh, is maybe struggling with identity, maybe struggling with what they want to do, maybe struggling with breaking out of a a prescribed path for themselves or projected onto them, maybe someone who's very risk averse, what would you advise or what would you tell them? What would you share with them?
That's a great question. I would say that now I would say to try and find community. I do think that there's more, again, for Asian American males, right? So I do think that there's more Asian American male community just in general than 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago. And I do think that it's because of, groups like this and others where sharing of Asian American male experience is way more open in conversation and discourse. So and this is across the board, but if I guess if you are not happy and you are struggling right now, I would say seek out, go and find a brethren or someone to seek out. On the flip side, if you are very happy and content, then I would say give back, right? Like, then see how you can maybe share some of your experience for others to listen to, because we have to kind of grow our collective identity a little bit, and yeah, find more people to, well, you know, again, going back to that idea, grow our identity and find more people to play on that playground.
Awesome. Yeah. Um, Again, that's exactly what we would love to build as this community too. So thank you again, JD, for coming on. It's super cool to hear from you. Where could people find you or get in contact with you?
Easy, Crushing the Myth, just like how it sounds, crushingthemyth.com. My email is jd@crushingthemyth.com. And if you're interested in following along, please check out our website, YouTube videos, send me a Facebook request, you know, reach out in any way. I'm JD at anything that I do. So
Yeah.
Great.
easiest.
And is it? Oh, sorry. Finish.
I said easiest way to get a hold of me.
Gotcha. And is there like if we wanted to kind of get on the platform or kind of contribute that way, is there a certain, maybe application or thing to do there other than just to contact you?
We have weekly speaker initiation. So if anybody wants to be a speaker, again, there's no cost. All this is free. We also provide speaker coaching as part of this process. We have a weekly call that is an initiation. You just join the call. Usually there's like 5 or 6 people in there. I lead it. And then I just give a brief overview of what the speaker coaching program is, what Crushing the Myth is, etc. And that's what prospective speakers go through. And then we have a small handful of speaker coaches that will coach you to get your story or perspective into a fantastic 10-minute talk.
I love that. I might have to do that myself.
You should. Absolutely. Please do. I'll send you an invite to next week.
Yeah. Great.
And similarly, like and subscribe this podcast. Also super awesome to connect with you and get to know you better.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And thanks for doing this. This is great.